What is up, everybody? I'm No Lucksgiven here with your afternoon snap, and today I'm doing something a little bit different. This is always something I've wanted to try. We're going to review some custom Marvel Snap cards. These aren't real, these are fan-made, and these ones are going to be made by Willow, at Willow Snapping on Twitter, who is a proficient Marvel Snap player and custom card creator. So I'm super excited to jump into these. I read the first one already that's on the screen right now, so I'm a little bit spoiled, but the rest I'm going to go into totally blind, and we're just going to talk about them and talk about all of the cool possible design space that there still is in Marvel Snap. So this first one is Spinneret, and some of them have different rules clarifications on them, and it's important to know that Spinneret updates her stats regardless of where she is, and this is a crazy ability. Like I said, I did look this one over already, so I've kind of had some time to think about the implications of this, because it seems absolutely crazy. It's a zero cost, zero power, but not really. Neither of those things are true. Those are just, you gotta put something there in the picture. This card's cost and power is equal to the stakes of the game. However many cubes you're playing for is actually how much this card will cost. So when I first read this card, I was like, 0 cost, 8 power. That's incredibly insane. And I think that it is still a very good card. It's a very splashy effect, but at the very least it is going to cost 1. It's never going to cost 0. It will always cost 1 at the start of the game, and then you can double the amount of cubes after you play it. Pretty straightforward stuff, and then it's going to double again on the final turn. So at the very least, you can make it a 1 cost, 4 power, though you actually don't have control over whether or not your opponent snaps. So your opponent can just not snap, which denies you 4 power if you play this card. And conversely, if your opponent snaps earlier, then this card's going to be more expensive to actually play. And it also limits your abilities to snap yourself. Like, a lot of times with a lot of decks, I'll snap pretty aggressively, snapping on turns 1 or 2, and this impacts your ability to snap. So if this is where we're starting off, I think that this is really cool. At first I thought this was way too broken, but then you start to wrap your head around it a little bit more and realize, well, 1 energy for 4 power isn't actually that broken, and there is like a slight drawback in it, in that your opponent can make it cost more, that it might cost 2 energy for you, and just a lot of different things. I do think that this would be a very powerful card, and it's also a very powerful card that doesn't necessarily have that many synergies. Though it does make me wonder, I am going to kind of think about like different synergies and where you could potentially play these cards as we go through them. There is a card that is not currently released in the game, and I think it's called Mephisto, but I know I'm going to butcher some pronunciations in this video. I'll see, you know what, let me look that up. Okay, this is fine just to show the card off for people that aren't familiar with it, but this is Mephisto. I did get the name correct, maybe I said Mephisto, but this is a real card. This is an actual card coming to Marvel Snap eventually. It's a 6 cost, 0 power, and says if you win this game, double your winnings. Now, I do understand that as these cards are worded, they wouldn't really be synergistic with each other, but it would be cool if this was like another potential reason to play Mephisto. We'll talk more about Mephisto when that actually comes out, but I just thought that would be cool to talk about like different synergies that could potentially have to do with the amount of cubes that you're playing for. And so Mephisto could be cool. You're probably going to play Mephisto in like a Mr. Negative deck or something, and it's a good point to bring up the rules clarification here, that Spinneret, like, her stats are going to update regardless of where she is, and I think that's to say, like, it doesn't have any interaction at all with Mr. Negative. The only real interactions with her are with whether or not you've doubled the cubes and your opponent has doubled the cubes. So that's like the only weak part about her, that she's kind of just like a good card that doesn't necessarily play into the other synergies of your deck. Though it would be fun to like, okay, oh, that's really interesting. Like, I'm pretty sure she gets to 8 at the end of the game when the cubes double. But now I'm thinking just about her interactions in like a Cerebro deck. You'd probably have to like Invisible Woman the Cerebro or something, but you're either putting her in Cerebro 4 or in Cerebro 8. And either way, that could work out in a pretty silly fashion, just in a deck that is otherwise maybe lacking for some options. So, really fun card, and like I said, if this is where we're starting, I'm really excited to see where we're going with all of this. Our second card, and again, okay, this looks like a pretty easy name, Carolina Dean. On reveal, half this card's power rounded up. So we've seen a lot of doubling power in Marvel Snap. There's Shuri, there's Black Panther, there is Deadpool and Dagger, though those are kind of doing different things. Or not Dagger, sorry, Human Torch. And I believe there's one other card coming in the future that's like a cheap card that's also going to have basically the same text as Black Panther. And I should say too, any future cards that I mention in this video could potentially get changed, but I want to say that's Gwen. You know what? I'll go look it up. So yeah, this is Gwenpool, which again is an unreleased card and could change. Honestly, this one might change. You'll see this one doesn't even have like a title on it. So I think that means it's even less likely to get released anytime soon. But I just wanted to bring it up as far as doubling, but that's not what we're doing here. We're halving a card's power, which is a pretty new idea, a new concept, and I'm trying to think of exactly what synergies you might be able to do with this. The first thing that comes to my mind is Luke Cage. You play Luke Cage, and then you play this, and then you've spent 4 energy for 7 power, which isn't necessarily the best rate, though if you have other synergies with either of these cards, then that can obviously be good. But what else can you do with Carolina Dean here? Any bonuses that you give to it aren't going to be as useful, but at the very least it is just a 2/3. I guess you can also roll it into a Cosmo because it's an on-reveal ability, or you can zero it. So maybe those are the ideas. It's just like another in the form of a long line of different drawback abilities that you then have to do something with. And I guess it is important to note, if you give the card +1 power, it will keep it. If you put it up to 7, it'll round up to 4 after halving itself. I think that's what rounded up means. Rounded up when you're having something, I feel like is always a little bit of ambiguous wording. But yeah, this is definitely interesting, an interesting way to throw a drawback onto a card. And I guess like the higher you would make this card, the crazier things could get. Like for instance, if this was a 5-cost card with 20 power, that could obviously get a little bit broken, or we'll say 16 power on the 5-cost card, maybe. That I think would probably be too strong. So that's why it's a little bit of a cheaper thing, but a cool concept. And for all of these cards, let me know in the comments if you come up with some other cool synergies with them, because I think that's part of the fun of looking at some custom cards here. And also feel free to @WillowSnappin on Twitter. You can find the thread and join in on the discussion there with all of these cool new effects Willow has come up with. Card number 3, White Sword. And I guess let's read the card and then let's read the rule clarification. Sure. So 3 cost, 1 power. on reveal at the end of the game, revive the most recently destroyed card. Interesting. And I don't know, maybe this will be clarified in the rules. If you Shang-Chi something, do you get it or do they get it back? Let's take a look here. White Sword would summon the most recently destroyed card at its original location and side of the board. And that makes sense. I think that if you were able to use this with Shang-Chi, it would be a little bit nuts. And that's kind of what I was just doing all Sunday with Noel and Gamma Lab. And yeah, those numbers get a little bit out of hand. But I think what White Sword is trying to do is protect your big cards from getting Shang-Chi'd. And it's interesting that it's an on-reveal trigger that happens at the end of the game. And then the other way to do this is to actually use it with Noel, Venom your own Noel, which makes Noel even bigger, and then you get to White Sword your Noel back. And you'll have to find a way to cheat out Noel somehow, maybe with magic, most likely, and then on the final turn of the game, you can go White Sword plus Venom. And I guess one other thing that would be interesting, because the trigger happens at the end of the game, but when does it check what's most recent? Is that when you play White Sword? Like, there's a few different ways that this card could work that I think would all be interesting. I think I understand what the implications here are, that at the end of the game, it's going to check what the last card destroyed was. But it would be kind of cool, too, if it just looked at the most recently card destroyed when you played it on turn 3. That would have some interesting applications as well, and potentially a little bit more counterplay to it, as people could, like, interrupt it with Killmonger or something like that on turn 3. But definitely an interesting one as well. A nice little tech card for those tech cards potentially, as a way to take out some or revive some cards for some Shang-Chis. I think that Shang-Chi is probably one of the strongest cards in the game right now. I'm recording this right before the next season starts, so I don't know what things are going to get changed, what things are going to get updated or whatever. Leader and Arrow, I think, are like more likely targets for nerfs and things like that, and those are obviously also very strong cards. But Shang-Chi is like kind of overpowered for what it does, and yeah, adding some interesting little counterplay to that is cool. Now, I think like with most cards with the word destroy on them, you probably want to play them in like some type of deck where you're making use of the synergies, and that could be either side. I guess you don't really like, yeah, you really want to use this to protect your own cards, but it's a cool one. I'm not sure how much play it would really see, but again, like, just cool to think about different possibilities in the game. Let's move on to card number 4. We've got a long way to go here still. This is Hellstorm, and it's a 4-cost, 4-power, and at the start of the game, if your deck contains only even-cost cards, +1 max energy. So if we think about that for a second, it means on turn 1, you can play a 2-cost card. Turn 2, you're also playing a 2. Turns 3 and 4, you could play multiple 2s. Or some 4-cost cards like Hellstorm itself. But I think where this gets really crazy is it just allows you to play 6-cost cards on turns 5 and 6. And that is really powerful. And to be able to do that every game, I think might be too much. Marvel Snap is already like a game where your plays are super consistent because you only have a 12-card deck, and I think giving you effects like that just start the game with, I'm not fully wording that correctly, but you get what I mean, I think is going to just be too consistent and too powerful, because this is effectively like playing a ramp deck, like you'd play something like Electro, which Electro has a drawback, and the drawback is you can only play that one card per turn. Hellstorm's drawback is that you can't play 1, 3, or 5 cost cards. But I don't know if that's limiting enough. I mean, you can't play Arrow, but you could play Leader, depending on how they change Leader. I feel like Leader could get some text added to it like magic. That's just a little prediction. By the time this video goes live, we'll already know what they're doing with Leader, if anything. But yeah, I mean, you could just go Leader Odin, and you just have to draw those cards. So that seems a little spooky to me, to be honest. I think that this card might be a little bit too pushed. What else could you do with max energy? Well, you could play a bunch of cards that cost... No, you couldn't play cards that cost 0. You want to play cards that cost 6, and then you get to play Mr. Negative a turn earlier. Could you go turn 1 Psylocke, turn 2 Mr. Negative? You could. And then turn everything, all of the 6 cost cards in your deck into 0 cost cards. Now, it's kind of weird to play Mr. Negative and then also care about energy, but there's definitely some possibilities in that. I do think that would be a reasonable drawback, because then you're not really getting any of the huge payoff cards. Like, you can't play Iron Man, you can't play Mystique. You could play Super Skrull, you could play Null in your Mr. Negative deck there, and you could still play Shang-Chi. We were just talking about Shang-Chi, but I think that, like, I don't know, and maybe you just throw all of these things together. You play those, and then you also play Leader Odin, and have all of that just be super strong. But, yeah, I think this one might miss the mark a little bit. I'm gonna have to downgrade you. I don't know if I should be rating these or doing something with them, but it's gonna be a long enough video anyways, but you will get some points off for this one, Willow. This seems crazy. It seems like a lot of fun, but I think it would be annoying pretty quickly because of how similar the games would be with each other. But I think that that's fine when you're making some cards. You throw a bunch of things at the wall, see what sticks, and see what you can make out of that. Our next card is Purple Man, another 4 cost, 4 power. And Purple Man says, at the end of the game, add a card from each player's hand to a random location. Interesting, interesting. So this is kind of like a Dracula. It basically is Dracula in that you'd play it in the same kind of decks. And then the... I don't want to say drawback. The thing that makes it different is that your opponent also gets to do the same. Now, your opponent will see that you have Purple Man, and unless you play it on turn 6, that's also a possibility. And I think that's something that people sometimes do with Dracula, is play it on turn 6, so it does feel like Dracula tends to get run out there on turn 4. But this could be very, very powerful, and I think that this one's balanced pretty well as well, because it's getting 4 power more than Dracula, but your opponent gets to do it too, and then it winds up being a lot different as well because you're also getting the on-reveal abilities from any of the cards that you drag out. I do think it's a nice card for some of these ramping strategies that just want to put, big stuff out onto the board like Giganto, and those strategies can definitely be fun, so having another tool for those I think could be good. At some point, you do have to wonder if there's going to be a critical mass of ramp cards in Marvel Snap. And then there's just, and this is an even cost card too, so you could throw it in your, what's that card called? Hell something Hell. I'm not super familiar with the Marvel IP, so please forgive me. I don't know the names of all of the superheroes and villains that are in our casts here, but yeah, this could go right into that deck as well, speaking of ramp. And the point I was making is, at some point, there will be so much ramp in Marvel Snap that you don't play the game, you don't look at the energy cost of cards, you just try to ramp out as many huge ones as you possibly can. But does seem like it could be a pretty cool card. And again, Willow's playing a lot with at the end of the game and different timing restrictions and things like that. So yeah, that's pretty cute. Our next card is Madam Web. 6 cost, 4 power. When you play a card, give it 2 power. Okay, so this is definitely a thinker. This is a card that really doesn't seem too powerful on the onset. So the base levels with it are going to be, there's a few things that immediately come to mind. First thing, 0 cost cards. You play Madam Web, then you play Wasp, and the other thing, what is the other thing? Yellow Jacket, Wasp and Yellow Jacket, and it can give both of those cards a little bit more power. At that point, you are playing, and let's not count the, I mean, it basically becomes a 6/8 at that point, which is definitely not a great rate. Though, if you have Serra, you can play this, and then you can play one other card. That one other card is probably best if it's Mr. Sinister. Because then that will add 8 power to the board itself to 4 power things. So that definitely gives some interesting opportunities. And then the second way that you think of to take advantage of it is going to be Magic, to get a whole nother turn. Play Magic on 5, Madam Web on 6. It's probably not that strong. I do think it's cool and I do think it's fun. I'm saying it's not that strong because you are then, like, this card doesn't do anything if you don't have the Magic. Though, one of the cool things about Magic is you're able to draw 1 card deeper into your deck. So, I guess you wouldn't really want to draw this thing on turn 7, though. Though, I will say, decks that are playing Magic are probably also decks that are playing Serra, some of the time at least. And also they're decks that are playing Mr. Negative, which this card does work with. And Mr. Negative, I don't know what they're going to do with that card. It almost feels like a custom card and definitely brings up the point that I was just talking about, that there is going to be a critical point in the game where they just say, we're going to have to change Mr. Negative, because every single card that comes out, you have to think about its implications with Mr. Negative. So it's almost not fair to say like a card is broken with or without Mr. Negative. We looked at Mephisto earlier. Mephisto, that's a card that's probably only going to get played in Mr. Negative decks, and mostly as a joke at that. But yeah, Mr. Negative is just absolutely crazy. But you could play Mr. Negative, that turns this into a 4/6, and then you dump a bunch of other sweet cards from Mr. Negative, and they all get even more powerful as well. So, seems like a cool one, definitely makes you think. Some big, powerful cards at the top of the curve that are kind of built around and kind of make you think are really, really, they're like the lifeblood of Marvel Snap. So having a few of these in here is definitely going to be appreciated. I feel like that's been like a lot of the Pool 4 and Pool 5, Series 4 and Series 5 cards that we've seen so far, and they can't keep that up forever. Eventually, we're going to have to get some more one-cost cards like Titania that aren't as exciting in Series 5, but it's definitely cool to have some huge, powerful build-around effects like Thanos and Galactus in the mix as well. And Madam Web, I think, is similar, which I think is a pretty good complement to it. Definitely defines how you want to build your deck. And the fact that she just slots in to a deck that we're already kind of looking at with Serra, Mr. Fantastic, and Magic, I think is like, you know, probably the first place that I'd start with her. But like I said, there could be some other silly things with Wasp and some cards that care a little bit more about grabbing that 2 power. I guess you could also cheat it out with Wave, and then you could play Gwenpool. So different options that you could have for her in the future, and I like cards at the very least that make you think a little bit. Next up, we've got Chasm, which has a rule clarification. I'll look at that in a moment, but it is a 3-cost 4 power card, which says on reveal, if you've played exactly one 1 and 2 cost card, +3 power. So Chasm really rewards you for curving out. Interesting. Well, you got to think about then what decks are going to curve out the best, and there's definitely some decks that this could slot into. Trying to think, there's no way to really make this go crazy efficiently. Like, one of my first thoughts, and it was probably because it looks like a Venom, Spider-Man kind of thing. I don't know exactly the lore behind Chasm, but the first thing that came to my head was just curving out in like a destruction deck, going turn 1 the Hood, turn 2 Carnage, though that was just like the first thing that came to my mind. I think that Patriot decks will also often curve out, though the real, I mean, just something super simple you could do with this deck is just play Quicksilver and then Domino. And this would be a nice little reward for playing Quicksilver and Domino as your only 1 and 2 cost cards. And then you don't even have to necessarily Chasm on turn 3. You can Chasm at any point as long as you've played exactly 1 and 2 cost, at which point, if you're only going to have Quicksilver and Domino in your deck, I don't think that people are doing this currently, but when Silver Surfer first came out, there was a period where people were at least playing Domino in their Silver Surfer decks. And I think the Quicksilver is like not as good, but if it's going to help you get +3 more power on Chasm, that could be something fun to try out. And then of course, Chasm is a 3 cost card, so it could get pumped up by the Silver Surfer. And speaking of which, you know what, I wasn't thinking, so I don't think any other cards cost 3, and okay, this one does, but I don't think that's really a Silver Surfer card. But you do have to think about Hellstorm in the new season pass card, whatever that's called, like the panther looking thing. That could be really annoying. So that's one more mark against Hellstorm. But yeah, you do kind of, in the same way you have to think about Mr. Fantastic all the time, you have to look at all 3 cost cards and think about Silver Surfer, and you gotta look at all 4 cost cards and think of, I think it's called like Xatu or something. I'm not super sure, it's not out yet. Don't blame me. Let's take a look at the rule clarification. Chasm is checking for all costs. For example, if you've played a 3 cost before playing Chasm, oh, his effect would not resolve. Okay, so you have to play this on turn 3. That definitely makes it a lot worse. Well, I think that you could get away without that. I mean, Willow says that's the rule, but we could make our own custom cards here. I think that, because I think that it would still be okay without that effect, but maybe I'm wrong. The idea being that then if you're gonna, like, this means that you aren't getting to play any 1 or 2 cost cards otherwise in your deck. And to be honest, I think having to play Quicksilver and Domino is even a little bit of a drawback. But yeah, I still think that this is a card. It's a 3 cost 7 power effectively, which is like a fine stat line. We see that in Maximus, and it definitely gets worse if you have to play it effectively on turn 3, but I still think it could find its way into a Silver Surfer deck otherwise. I don't think it would be broken. I think it would just be something that people would play sometimes. I don't even know if it would necessarily make the stock list, and again, because I don't think you want to play Quicksilver and Domino, but that option is certainly on the table. And next up, we're going to look at a 2 cost 3 power Copycat. While this is in your hand, when the opponent plays a card, this becomes a copy of it. So you could run it out early as a 2 cost 3 power if nobody's played anything to start the game. And this is like this is an effect that I'm sure we will see in Marvel Snap at some point. We've got Morph, which has a much higher high roll and low roll potential. But I've actually been playing recently, and we have a location in the game, Machine World, and maybe I will throw that up on the screen as well, because it's not a super common location. Let's see, can I find it here? Through the search, I think that this only searches articles on Marvel Snap Zone. So let's see. Oh, it searches articles and decks, but I'm gonna look this up while I maintain talking here. The basic thing, oh, that's not gonna give it to me. All right, I have to go to locations. Sorry, where are locations? Cards, locations? Wow, okay, I'm losing it here. Do I have to full screen this? Oh, I've got to full screen it. Okay, and then we can find locations, and we'll open this, and then I'll scroll down for Machine World. But the point that I'm getting to when I eventually find this here is that, all right, now let's click on all locations, is that Machine World seems like it is a pretty big drawback, giving your opponent a card whenever you play a copy of it there. And, all right, it's gonna pop up on the screen in 1 second here. Bam, live editing. And it's just gonna save me some work later. Hopefully you guys are enjoying this and sticking with it here. Different type of content, different style of content, just like a long talky thing, kind of like a patch notes review. I'm probably going to wind up doing that in the next day or so, depending on what actually gets released in the game, but felt like this was cool content that I could record today while the future is a little bit more uncertain. But here's what I'm getting at. When you play a card in Machine World, you can play whatever it is. You can play, well, the first thing that came to my mind was the 3/7. Maybe because we just saw 3/7, but now I'm forgetting the name of that. 3/7 that draws your opponent's 2 cards. Let's think of any other card. Let's think of Thor. Let's think of Jubilee. Let's think of literally any card. The point is, when you give your opponent a card with Machine World, you are playing that card on curve. And Copycat kind of has the same drawback. When you play against Copycat or with Copycat, the other player is going to be playing their cards on curve and effectively using their energy. And when you Copycat a card, a turn 5 Jubilee, not as good. Remember the name. A turn 4 Maximus, not as good as other potential turn 4 options. So I think that this is a reasonable card that could certainly help out just to play like a generic style deck. I think it is going to be the best with Serra. Most cards are pretty good with Serra, but it would allow you to then make your cards cheaper and potentially find ways to play those later in the game. But basically, I'm just bringing up my revelation that when Machine World first came out, I was like, oh, this location is like Jotunheim. You want to avoid it until the final turn. And it obviously is good to avoid Machine World until like the 5th or 6th turn, and then your opponent has no possibility to make use of it. But you can also just kind of play into Machine World. So that's kind of like just my hot random tip in this custom card review. And that's why Copycat, I think, is a lot worse than it looks, but at the same time, totally fair, totally balanced. I think that we will 100% see this card get added to Marvel Snap in some capacity. Or we won't, because it's actually not as exciting as it initially looks. If it even looks exciting at all. Morph, like, barely, it really doesn't see any play. And Morph is kind of like a ramp card. Maybe that's where the meta goes. When there's so much ramp, then it's all about trying to like counter your opponent's ramp and stuff. So that's kind of interesting. But Copycat yeah, I think that this is definitely, all of that to say, this is an effect we will definitely get in Marvel Snap in the future. Next, we've got a 5/2, so your Mr. Negative bells are going off, but 5 costs 2 power on reveal, and this card is named Mikhail Rasputin. Set the cost of, I know Rasputin or Rasputin is like a real name of like a real guy or something, I think. But I think it's called Rasputin. First name, Mikhail. On reveal, set the cost of 2 random cards in each player's hand to 0. Again, another ramp card, but also giving the effect to your opponent definitely makes it a little bit more, I'm trying not to say fair and balanced. I don't know why those specific combination of words are popping into my head. But that does help to keep it a little bit more on the fair side. Balance, I don't know, because you build your deck around Mikhail. So you have more of an idea that he's coming, and you have more of an idea that he's coming when you build your deck, and then you also have more of an idea of what's coming when you make your plays throughout the game. So your opponent might make some weird plays not knowing that they're about to get 2 free cards in their hand, which could certainly make some things interesting. So it sets the cards to 0, so you don't even have to really play anything fancy with that. Like, I think you just wind up like, I mean, Leader Arrow would obviously be really good if we take a look at the current patch, but even something like Arrow Magneto could just allow you to drop a ton of power on the final turn. And honestly, this with Arrow does seem pretty insane. If you're able to hit your Arrow, that is, because you're not always, there's going to be some randomness there. But you could always just snap and bluff it, I guess, if you lose that. But yeah, the ability to, your opponent's then going to be able to play, let's say, 3 cards on their turn, a 6-cost card plus their 2 free cards, and you could maybe just move them all to 1 lane with Arrow. Now, the fact that they're playing 3 cards means that you might not be able to Arrow all 3 of them, so that could be interesting, and at the same time, you might not be able to leader all 3 of their cards, so that provides some interesting things with it as well. And I guess you don't actually have to hit your Arrow, right? Now that I think about it. You can just play your 2 free cards in your other lanes to win them, and then play Arrow in another lane so that you lose it, as your opponent is able to drop a bunch of cards. So that seems like a really, really powerful interaction, but it's also like, some of these things, like, can you blame Mikhail for how broken Arrow is? Not really. That's not super fair to Mikhail. It does seem like it's a cool card, though. Making things cost 0, cheating energy in various ways is always going to be something that can be a little bit scary. We've got another 0 power card here, and this one is a 3/0, and I did see there were some rule clarifications on this one as well. We'll get to those in a moment. When the opponent discards a card, this has power equal to it. Interesting. So this is kind of like, it seems like a tech card at first, and I think the other implication here is that on turn 6, you would go Siphon plus Moon Knight on the final turn, hoping to discard one of your opponent's big cards. Obviously, if something like Dracula is a really popular deck, then you can also siphon whatever Dracula is taking in the end game, and that seems pretty good, but otherwise, I think you're mostly using it alongside Moon Knight on the final turn. And importantly, this isn't an ongoing card. This is just calculating, and it's only calculating once. So like if they discard multiple cards, it's not going to work. So let's read this here. Siphon would set his power, meaning he will always have the power of the most recently discarded enemy card, similar to Null. He would retain his buffs in addition to the power generated by this effect. Right. Well, Null is kind of weird because when you, I mean, we don't have to get into all of the rules, interactions, and stuff here, but I think that Null is like coded wrong or something because it has an ongoing ability, but it doesn't function the same way other ongoing abilities do because it works in your hand. But that aside, the first and really only thing that comes to my mind with Siphon is after being a tech card that you're supposed to play it alongside Moon Knight. Let me know if you can come up with any other ways to make use of this. But I think that's what I'm going to say. It's a Moon Knight card to just give you a different, interesting play on the final turn that might not be too shabby, but I don't know, because at the same time, I mean, maybe you don't want to play them in that order. Maybe you want to play Moon Knight on turn 3, 4, or 5, so that way you know whether or not you want to Siphon. Because I don't like playing Moon Knight on the final turn of the game. I like playing it earlier to try to disrupt my opponent, and then if you were able to hit something big, then you have a bunch of power for Siphon, or if you were able to hit one of their key cards with Moon Knight, that's also cool. And I don't really see it having too much other implications other than if you're really trying to hose a specific player playing the discard deck, which I am a big fan of, and maybe that's why I don't want to like Siphon, because obviously this card's very good against that deck. If you could steal like their 30 power Apocalypse or something like that, that can obviously be quite cool. The next card also has a rules clarification, and this is a 6/6, the Hunter. On reveal, if you've played exactly one 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 1, 2, 3, 4, and 5 cost card, plus 6 power at all locations. Well, like I said, I really like 6 cost cards that kind of define how you build your deck and what you do with your deck. So this does seem like you're going to want to have played it with Domino and Quicksilver for sure. That is pretty straightforward. And then you just kind of have to get a little bit lucky. You probably play, so the rest of your deck, you think about the breakdown, you've got 9 other cards, so you could do a 2, 3, 4 split. Is that 9? Yeah, that is. So you play 4 3-cost cards, 3 4-cost cards, and 2 5-cost cards, though you might do a 3-2-2 or something like that as well, and play 1 other 6-drop. I'm thinking if there's potentially a way to, well, at that point, maybe your backup plan is Silver Surfer. That's interesting. Yeah, definitely some fun potential ways to take advantage of this. You can play a variety of different 5-cost cards. You could play Iron Man, so that way you're getting plus 12 power at the Iron Man location. And then you can't, I don't think you can play something like Mojo, because I think you do want to play Domino. I think that that just helps your curve tremendously, helps your consistency tremendously, though maybe I'm wrong. Maybe I'm wrong. And if you don't get to activate the Hunter, that could also be fine if you're willing to play like a backup plan. Like I do think, what about a card like this in a Spectrum Destroyer deck? That deck doesn't need another 6-cost card on the top of the curve, but that is a deck that sometimes just curves out. And there's other decks that curve out too, but I think that that's one of the better ones that just plays a 1-cost card on turn 1, 2 on 2, 3 on 3, etc. So that could be kind of interesting. There is one other play that you can make. Actually, I thought of 2. So again, going to talk about both Serra and Magik. And Serra doesn't give you too much leeway. And now that I think about it, it's probably bad, but you could play Serra as your 5-cost, and then that would allow you to, on turn 6, play your 1 or 2-cost cards if you draw them later in the game, and you're not playing a Domino Quicksilver build of the deck. And Magik is the same thing. You just have an additional turn to play all of those cards, and you could use that extra turn. Like you could go Even say you go turn 1 Domino, turn 2 Quicksilver, or let's say you don't. You go turn 5 Magic, and then turn 6, you get to play 6 power. You can play a 1, 2, and a 3 out of nowhere. On turn 4, you played a 4-cost card. What would that have to be? Mr. Negative? No, I'm joking, but probably, I mean, it would just have to be like a strong 4-cost card. I don't know what that would be necessarily. Okay, I kind of have a different idea for a curve. So turn 3 you play Thor, because that's just a strong card. Turn 5 you play, oh, maybe, I don't know if Mjolnir and 0-cost cards are going to mess with the Hunter. Maybe they would, based off Willow's clarification earlier. But either way, this seems really cool. I think that this would be an awesome card added to the game. Is it too much power? 18? It's a lot of power, actually. It might be a little bit too strong for what you're getting, because the drawback isn't that severe, though I think you do have to play this in a Quicksilver Domino list. At least that's my first impression. Either Quicksilver Domino or Magic plus catching up, but that's going to be a lot more inconsistent. So the drawback is Quicksilver Domino. The reward is... oh, it's not 18 power. It's 24 power. Wow. Wow. Okay. That's a lot of power. It's a 6/12 by itself, and then adds 6 power to the other location you're trying to win. You don't really care that it's adding 6 power to another location, so it's kind of 18 in that regard, but it's 18 power to the locations that you're trying to win, and then would also give you the potential to win like Sanctum Sanctorum locations. Your 5-drop, like I said, could be Professor X, so that could be a really good way to win that. And even if you're like behind by a decent amount in your Professor X location, the Hunter can win it for you. So it definitely does seem like it could go well in some type of Spectrum deck as well. Maybe the 3-cost card that you play, you just want that to be Cosmo to kind of be a little bit disruptive. Though I think you play a few different 3-cost cards, give yourself some options. You play Chasm on turn 3. And yeah, you make some fun stuff work there. Clarification, if you played a 0-cost card before playing the Hunter, the effect would not resolve. And I don't know if that counts as playing it or if you've actually flipped it over, and which you have to do. So, okay, there's one other thing then that comes to mind. What about how does this card interact with Invisible Woman? Because Invisible Woman it's not one of my favorite cards, because I think that the information aspect of it isn't that strong. But one thing that I've always thought that's fun with Invisible Woman is it does actually protect cards from Destroyer, and it has an ongoing ability for Spectrum. So same thing, maybe there's some cute things that you could do with that and the Hunter. If the Hunter can't see the cards, did you play them? I'm not sure. That is for the developers to figure out when they eventually put this card in the game, but seems cool to me. I'm ready to play with it. I want to play with the Hunter right now. That's definitely got me excited. Next card up is Umar. When a 6-cost card is discarded, add a copy of it to the owner's hand. Whew, okay, this one's going to take a second. This one is a synergistic one. But you know what? You know what this does? Oh, does it? Okay, let's say some words out loud now. It protects your Hela from getting discarded. And that is really important. But what's weird is when you discard anything else from your deck, you're also going to get that back. So if you discard your Magneto, you're going to get another copy of that, which you didn't really need. Interesting. Obviously, there's something crazy that you could probably do with this and Apocalypse, though I don't think I want to. It could be funny in some crazy deck. The thing is, you don't need to do that with Apocalypse. Dracula, like, you can have any number of Draculas, and Apocalypse will get discarded to every single one of them. So I don't think you need to use that as an interaction. The 6-cost card is discarded. Add a copy of it to the owner's hand. Okay, well, I think I just cracked it. Quinjet on 1 or 2. Turn 3, Umar. Turn 4, Lady Sif. Discard your 6-cost card. Turn 5, play your reduced cost 6-cost card. But no, then you don't have the one to play on turn 6. So then you would just have to play a different card on turn 6. But that is a really roundabout way to ramp something out. I was trying to think of what decks really need ramp, and the first thing that I thought of was Agatha. But this would be horrible in Agatha. Imagine trying to play Agatha and then like you try to discard it and she just comes right back. That would be absolutely troll. This would be really funny against an Agatha deck. But I think that there is some play with Umar. And you know what? You don't even have to play Quinjet on turn 1 or 2. You can go turn 3 Umar, turn 4 Quinjet Lady Sif. Discard a 6-cost card. Turn 5, you get to play that 6-cost card. Turn 6, you have to play a different 6-cost card, but that could still be pretty powerful. Getting to play 2 6-cost cards in one turn or one game is really strong, so you just have to think about what shell wants Quinjet and 6-cost cards, but also wants Lady Sif. And now I'm thinking about, I don't know the name of it, but it is a real card and I might have it. It might be called the Hell Carrier. But it is the 6-cost card that when it is discarded, is that a real card in the game? Do I own that card? When did that card come out? A 6-cost card that when it's discarded, you add, I want to say 3 random cards to your hand? And that's just a card that works with Quinjet and Lady Sif. So you'd then grab a copy of that, which you could then play on turn 5 for 10 power. And then on turn 6, you're trying to play the cards that it gave you in some capacity. I'm not sure. I don't think that you do all of those things in one game, but that's like an alternate plan that you could potentially go with. But interesting card. Yeah, just like some very straightforward text. Not that many words is what I mean. And not that much as far as stats, but really makes you think, what crazy things could you get up to with Umar? We've only got 2 cards left. We are about to wrap this up. And I just saw that this card is also named Umar, so I think just like the flavor, Willow likes the flavor of this card or this character in particular. But let's see what this version of Umar does. And I do think that Marvel Snap will have to do this at some point. Like the fact that they've already used some pretty big name cards like Iron Man and Spider-Man and Captain America. We've already seen with Miles Morales that they're going to probably remake some existing characters in slightly different forms. In addition to variants, like brand new cards with the same names or like similar names. They'll say Jane Foster, the Mighty Thor, Miles Morales, the Amazing Spider-Man. But this is another version of Umar, another take on it. At the start of the game, if your deck contains only odd cost cards, I was waiting for this. I was waiting for the odds only to match the evens only. Let's see if this is just as powerful. And I'm not sure that it is. Actually, this one might suck, but afflict the enemy with -3 power at 2 random locations. So that's a cool effect. -3 power at 2 random locations to start the game, I think does a lot in Marvel Snap, because it tells your opponent, these are the 2 locations that I'm going to be battling for. And I think would just be a really interesting way to impact the game overall. Like, imagine there was a location that when it flipped up said, you have +3 power at a location and your opponent has +3 power at the other location, and it just kind of like randomly decided it. It would be a lot cooler if it was the first location that flipped up in the game, and I just think there's a lot of like really interesting applications there as far as a lane-based game where players are incentivized to play at one location versus the other, which is why I like Marvel Snap. That basically is part of the core gameplay element, but I just mean less about the synergies and more just, you're winning this location, you're winning this location, go. Now, this is a little bit different. It says you're winning 2 of those locations, so you're probably going to give your opponent the 3rd location, but there's always a bunch of mind games involved with that. And one of the reasons that I think this Umar might just be balanced right off the rip is you can't play 6 cost cards with Umar, which is an insanely massive drawback. Now you could play Death. Death costs 9, so you could get that in the deck, and that could be a strong way to play it for sure. But not being able to play 6 cost cards, I think, is a pretty big drawback. And now I'm thinking about it, I'm thinking Death, Taskmaster, Deadpool, Venom, Deathlock. You can't play Carnage, you can't play Bucky Barnes, but you can play the Hood, Nova, Killmonger. Can't play Shang-Chi, can play Arrow. You throw in Umar. Okay, maybe we've got a deck. That's just the first deck that comes to mind. I'm sure there's other decks you can come up with. Patriot has a bunch of 3 cost cards. Silver Surfer has a bunch of 3 cost cards, of course, because you probably just play a Patriot Silver Surfer deck, and you don't even have to play the actual Umar. She could be a 7/10 or whatever. So that way you can't Mr. Negative her. She's a 7/7. I think that's probably the worst stat line I can come up with, but maybe that would also be good because then you could Magic or something, and Magic is also a 5 cost card. And importantly, it doesn't change the location. So you're still going to get unique games where you have 3 different locations. You can't change the locations with Magic or something like that now. What is tricky about her is that because you don't have to play her, because it's not an on reveal, like these at the start of the game abilities are just really strong. So that might continue to seem too powerful, but I think that this one's balanced, and I think that this one could actually be fun to play both with and against, to be totally honest. And that might sound crazy, but I think that there's something fun about like thinking that you have a free win in, well, not even a free win, but like your opponent is just going to be so much more incentivized to play at those locations where they're ahead immediately. But yeah, there's a lot of cool things that I think that just adds to the game of Marvel Snap. And we've got one last card to round this video out, and that is going to be Yelena Belova, which is a 1 cost 2 power on reveal. Add a random non-collectible card to each player's hand. So my first thought with that was actually not, I think, the intended use. The intended use is really interesting, and we're going to have to load up Marvel Snap Zone to actually see what this is, so maybe I will start getting that ready. But when this, how do we find non-collectible cards? I might not even be able to find this. Let's go to unreleased cards and see if there is a way to just sort by uncollectible cards. But before Galactus and Thanos were actually added to the game, they were still in the game. You could get them off of random generated effects like Agent 13 and the Hub. And so I think they were kind of considered uncollectible cards, and that's what this makes me think of. It's also a 1/2 just like Agent 13, and maybe just because of that, I think that this would be a cool way to kind of preview the next card that's going to be added to the game if you were able to use this to grab, I believe the card Zabu, by the way, the card that I keep avoiding saying. I'll say it once here at the end of the video because we only got true fans watching at this point. But yeah, Zabu. Okay, I just found it. I can't find uncollectible cards, but it would be cool if it was able to find you some teased cards, those unreleased cards that just aren't out yet. But I think what it's actually doing, and I'm going to try to find it in 1 second after I'll try to, when I'm not recording here for a moment. It allows you to find squirrels, demons, doombots, even widow's bites, weird things like that. But for the most part, is just going to give you a random assortment of non-ability cards. Now, some of those cards are going to have abilities, the Power Stones. We just mentioned Thanos. Seems like there's a lot of terrible ones as well. You could get the new thing from the Sentry, whatever that's called, the -8 power to the rightmost location. And I don't know if that card, it might say on it that it can only get played at the rightmost location. It might have some weird effect like that on it. Though, yeah, you wouldn't want to play that regardless. You would just keep it in your hand. So there's a lot of junk that Yelena can give you. And it's obviously, you can really high roll, give them Widow's Bite, and give yourself probably a demon is my first thought. Though a few of the Power Stones seem like they could be cool as well. And maybe you could even throw this in a Thanos deck, because those Thanos decks are often playing Beast to bounce this and Devil Dinosaur to take advantage of the extra cards. And I'm just thinking that way, like imagine you play Yelena and you grab an additional copy of Mind Stone. That seems pretty cool. This is like another card that obviously is meant to get played with like Quinjet effects. I generally think that these cards aren't super powerful. Agent Coulson, Hellcarrier, Nick Fury. I don't think that they're particularly good cards, but they can be fun. And I think that's part of what we're doing today, is just looking at some fun ideas, expanding our brain, and thinking about some more things that could potentially make Marvel Snap an even better game. Definitely kind of a love letter to Marvel Snap. And thank you very much, Willow, for putting out this content for everybody and allowing everybody to see it here. If you enjoyed this content, let me know. Let me know what you thought about it, and maybe we could do some more things like it in the future. I know a bunch of other people have created their own custom Marvel Snap cards, and Willow also has some other cards as well that I haven't looked at, or at least I haven't looked at in a while, but I think they've made enough cards that I have not seen them all for sure, and it would be fun to potentially dive into those in the future. So let me know what you thought about it, but for today, that is going to be it. So thank you guys very much for watching. I'm No Lux Given. Peace.